The Washington Post claimed earlier this year, they said that the Biden administration spent $7.5 billion on installing EV chargers in the US. But for $7.5 billion, it only built 7 chargers. So they framed this story as to say that each EV charger cost $1 billion each. Now, I don't know who's running the Washington Post, but clearly this is a targeted disinformation campaign, likely sponsored by fossil fuels or potentially by internal combustion engine vehicle companies in America. The attempt here is insidious. This is borderline evil, framing this story in such a way that is incredibly misleading and has meant that many Americans think that that America is literally spending $1 billion to install one single supercharger location. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching The Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. I want to say a big thank you to all of you for supporting the channel. By becoming YouTube members of the channel, that does help me to continue to make videos and to try to help educate people on the truth behind what's happening with EV chargers, the truth behind electric cars. And it does give me a platform. So thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, I'll put a link in the description below. Now, the Washington Post story was picked up by numerous media around about the middle of the year, before the election, of course. I don't know if that was part of it or not, but this story was picked up by thousands of the media, and people really believe this stuff. I mean, they believe that the Biden administration built 7 chargers for $7.5 billion. As President Joe Biden's term came to an end, social media users continue to falsely claim that his administration spent billions of dollars on the construction of just 7 EV charging stations. Multiple high-profile figures, including sitting members of Congress, have promoted these claims. The claims completely misrepresent funding set aside by the 2021 Infrastructure and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, for a national network of publicly available electric vehicle chargers. Biden set a goal of creating 500,000 EV chargers by 2030, which would be good. I mean, there'd still be a lot more EV chargers in China by a factor of 10, but that'd still be a good number. Let's have a look at the actual facts here. Claim: the Biden administration spent $7.5 billion to build its 8 EV charging stations. $7.5 billion. Obviously, that's incorrect. The $7.5 billion figure refers to the total amount allocated through the 2021 law to build a network of charging stations across the US, not the amount that has actually been spent. There are currently 214 operational chargers in 12 states that have been funded through the law. Now, that funding was not $7.5 billion. It was a tiny fraction of that amount. And in fact, there is an additional 24,800 projects underway across the country, according to the Federal Highway Administration. So in total, there is actually 25,004 chargers which will come online, but even those 25,000 won't cost $7.5 billion. They'll just get some of that $7.5 billion in funding to help with their build out. A charger, often called a charging port, provides electric power to one vehicle at a time through a connector which is plugged into the vehicle. Stations are physical locations that can have multiple chargers. So, I mean, this is a really simple reality. It'd be like saying, 7 petrol pumps were installed, but each charging location has multiple chargers, just like a petrol station does or like a gas station does. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg called the claims spreading online false in a series of posts. Now, of course, he said they were false and social media just went, wow, look, he's lying. $7.5 billion has not been spent nor anything like that, he said, adding that federally funded chargers are built by individual states, not the federal government, and that most will be built in the second half of the 2020s. The total $7.5 billion in funding consists of $5 billion distributed through the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, or NEVI, and $2.5 billion distributed through the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, or CFI. NEVI funds, as determined by a formula, go annually to departments of transportation in all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia from 2022 to 2026. The funds will be available until 2030. Each year, 10% of NEVI funding is set aside for states and local governments that require additional assistance. CFI provides grants to states and other localities through an application progress. It funds electric vehicle charging as well as other alternative fueling infrastructure with a focus on underserved and disadvantaged communities. Republican Michael Ruley, a Republican from Ohio, was among multiple high-profile figures who falsely claimed this week that the entire budget has already been spent. Republicans like him give Republicans a bad name. There's a lot of Republicans, in my opinion, who are doing a good job and not spreading this entirely misinformation. He knows this is fake and he's making these claims anyway. Pete Buttigieg will leave his post as Transportation Secretary, having spent $7.5 billion to build 8 EV charging stations, he wrote in an X post that has received 63,000 likes and shares as of Wednesday, but as of today, more than 150,000. It's been seen by millions of people. His legacy will be squandering billions on something nobody wants, while millions struggle to afford the things they need. His office didn't respond to a request for comment by the media. Obviously, the media were calling him to say, "Mate, this is a whole bunch of bullshit that you're spreading. You are putting yourself in a situation of lacking credibility, except with idiots who want to believe this stuff." But unfortunately, millions of idiots do want to believe it. By early this year, only 4 states, Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, and Hawaii, had open stations funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Associated Press reported in March. A Washington Post article published the next day said this amounted to just 7 stations. Lauren McDonald, an independent analyst tracking the electric vehicle charger build-out, told the AP that when assessing the progress that's been made, it's important to understand that some states have extensive experience constructing electric vehicle charging infrastructure, while others have little to none. He explained that Wisconsin, for example, had to pass a new law in order to comply with federal requirements. This is a federal program, but at the end of the day, it's completely dependent on the states, he said. And so the real criticism probably needs to be directed at the states that are moving slowly, or how the program was structured, but I don't know how else you would have done it. Asked whether the federal government could do anything to help states move faster, McDonald suggested that it could have provided them with more guidance on how to manage their individual build-outs. Now, these idiotic states could just call Tesla and say, "Guys, can you help us here?" And Tesla would have said, "Yeah, sure, no problems." I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not some Tesla fanboy, but the reality is building these charging stations out, it's not rocket science. There's already tens of thousands of them in America. All 50 states, Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, have access to 2 rounds of NEVI funding totaling nearly $2.4 billion, according to the Federal Highway Administration. As of Friday, 37 states have access to their 3rd round of funding for an additional $586 million total. This does not represent money that has already been spent, though, just the money that is available to fund the projects. The Federal Highway Administration has announced more than $1.3 billion in awards through the funding. So the truth is, $1.3 billion has been awarded, but not even spent yet. A tiny fraction of the $7.5 billion. There are currently more than 203,000 publicly available charging ports across the US, with nearly 1,000 being turned on every single week. Nearly 1,000 chargers are going live every single week. This is more than double the number available in 2021. In addition to NEVI and to CFI, funding sources include federal tax incentives and private investments. As you can see, the whole idea, the premise that 7 or 8 vehicle charging stations were built from 7.5 million, or 7.5 billion, I should say, is entirely false. And this is a story that should have been shut down immediately. But unfortunately, there are fossil fuel interests and some politicians who are taking advantage of gullible idiots spreading this false information, and this is setting back the EV transition.